Welcome, Annalisa. Thank you so much for joining us on the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you on. And so wanted to really dive deep into, what you're doing now, but really what brought you to where you are. Tell us your story and what you learned along the journey and like how you've landed to what you're doing now. Like what were some of those things that really drove your motivation?
Oh, great. And lovely to join you and be with you today, Monica. Thanks for the opportunity. So today you find me in London. After 2 years here, perhaps not traveling internationally, I still have my home in Princeton, New Jersey, and still live on a global basis. But, today I have a rich portfolio of board work, largely in the life science and digital health space, coupled with a burgeoning and ever-growing non-profit philanthropic portfolio, and coupled to a certain extent with work in the public sector, public services. And I really enjoy working as ever, as I was in an operating role in the corporate world, 24/7. But, it all started, I'm a trained physician, trained in medicine. In the 80s, spent 9 years in the British military, in the British Navy, and really at a very young age, learning the lessons of leadership. In fact, I often offer some perspectives on that, called From the Battleship to the Boardroom, because I think it was really a seminal moment in my career and growth, my experiences in the British military. But having left the military, already having had a couple of kids, which was quite unusual at the time, I joined the farm. I spent a little bit of time in the UK National Health Service training in cardiovascular medicine and in basic research. But I quickly decided that having circumnavigated the globe once with the military, that I was itching for broader, bigger impact, and I joined Bristol Myers Squibb in the mid to late 90s. And that's really the start of a journey over about 20 years in roles of increasing on a global basis geographically, but also in the fields of life science, therapeutics and drug development, culminating in my role leading medical globally at Bristol, and then subsequently leading global R&D at Merck Serono. And then I made a switch. Having worked in big pharma. We'll perhaps go into why that was the case. I moved into the biotech, co-founded, was the first CEO of a little biotech called Dimension Therapeutics. And that was my first journey into entrepreneurship, really. Very, very different part of the industry. Grew that, took it public on the NASDAQ, and subsequently sold that. We were working on rare diseases, gene therapy for children. And then came to 2017, and having navigated a pretty sort of remarkable set of experience, and was so privileged to have worked, as I mentioned, globally with so many amazing people on some fundamentally important programs impacting the lives of patients globally. I decided that it was time to really more diversify into this portfolio, where I could spend my life on two key goals. One was transferring knowledge and experience that I had gained along the way to the next generation of young men and women entrepreneurs, as they sought to build their companies, finance their companies, and obviously make a difference. And secondly, to think about how we could bring the right sort of capital to connect with ideas. So one really focused on mentoring, coaching, strategy work, and the second on ensuring these companies could be successful, because we were getting the right sort of capital evolving in our sector, very much evolving in our sector, to connect with great ideas in the pipeline. So that's largely what I spend my life doing across the public and private sectors.
Oh my word, that is a remarkable journey. And I have so many questions that I don't even know where to start, but I do want to start where it piqued my interest, where you talked about really kind of talking and kind of transferring knowledge and talking about from like the British military to the boardroom, because we focus a lot on helping accelerate women in leadership, and we always try to teach them around how the characteristics and the definition of leadership is gender agnostic. and most people, from, but the sociology or the society norms make it look different, for women when they kind of try to emulate some of those characteristics and competencies. So being that you were very successful and you were in the military and then you went, kind of like to this whole idea, corporate or boardroom, what are some of the lessons learned, or what are some of the things that you try to teach individuals that really will help you be successful, in kind of the boardroom?
Yes, that's a really good question. And, I would say in many ways, the experiences I had in my 20s in the military, where frankly, I was, as a physician, often the only female, either in a land-based facility, and for a year I was at sea as the only woman with 700 men during Gulf War One. And, what I learned, and in some ways it took me probably another 10 to 15 years to really reflect on what I'd learned and how that could then translate. And I would say that, to your point, look, at the end of the day, when I think about leadership, there's about 5 things that leaders commonly do. I mean, all leaders. And the importance of, and I'll come on to then how one might deliver on that, and why it is okay to declare oneself as a woman with amazing attributes and style that may look very different from a male colleague, but the ability to be successful as a leader is all about how that gets translated into how one conducts oneself. So, it is absolutely clear that great leaders have a clarity of vision. I mean, that's the number one priority for me. I mean, if I can't get really in my head a sense of where we need to get to, what that future state looks like, as I'm building a team, building a program, building a company, helping any organization, I think it's really, really difficult, because of course the next thing that leaders really are good at, or need to excel at, is to engage people. I mean, leaders are able, through amazing communication and many other methods, to engage groups of people and individuals to follow them on that journey. And I, again, learned that in the military very early on, taking people in and out of very risky, very stressful situations is remarkable leadership. And I think it's really no different in the corporate sector.
Yeah.
The third thing that leaders do is that they build energy. And there's overall a building of energy. I learned this early on at Bristol from a very senior leader. I'm always looking at leaders that I really admire and want to follow and work through, men and women, how they do achieve their goals and take companies forward. So energy. Great leaders create energy in an organization. And what they also do is that they understand what drains energy in an organization, and they make it their business to really get in and mitigate against that. So leaders create energy, they channel it and focus it in the right way, and they're very clear about that. And then what they do is that they make sure that things that drain energy from an organization are removed. So for me, energy is clear. And then I think the other thing that leaders then obviously do is that they focus on execution. And because at the end of the day, you have to get stuff done, and then they have to define how we do things around here. So those are 2 important attributes of leaders. Here's how we get stuff done. And at the end of the day, we deliver on our promises. And then the last thing they do is really, they're very focused on measuring, so that everybody is clear about when the goals have been hit. And that's important for a couple of reasons, largely because there's often a lot of stakeholders that want to know how you're doing against your your objectives. But I think it also creates energy in your team, because we all want to be part of a winning team, and we want to measure and really understand when we're successful. And sometimes it's obvious in our industry, of course, when a drug gets approved and when you sell that first pill or injection, whatever, on a global basis, we all feel remarkably satisfied. But there are many, many wins along the way, and these all need to be celebrated and rewarded. So for me, to energize, engage, envision, execute and measure. Actually, I did come up at one point in my career with this little equation called EMC squared, because I was born. So I lived in Princeton for a long time, and of course,
right.
that's an obvious equation tied to Princeton. And lots of E's, measuring is the M, and the C squared was all about communication and collaboration, because to get all of this done, you have to be very, very good at communicating. And I've worked on that a lot over the years. I was not a very articulate, outward going R&D leader, I have to tell you. But when I moved to the US, I discovered that being a good communicator was going to be critical. And of course, in the military, that was always very important. So I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And collaboration, and you know, we've seen that over and over again. People that can bring teams together and to get them to collaborate, work together, are always going to be successful. So that's really, you know, the way that I think about leadership. We could have a cross-cutting theme across my career, which has been that I've always tried to be gracious, and I've always tried to be an altruistic leader. I've always tried to see the good in people first and foremost, and assume that everyone comes to work every day to do their best. And that's always been my assumption. And I've always felt that coming from that position of goodness would help me sustain as a leader over time. And I think today that's more so, it's so important, and more so than ever. And when it comes to men and women, look, at the end of the day, I think you said it. I think that great leaders do the same things, to be honest. I think that they might have certain strengths that allow them in certain situations to be successful, because you don't need all of those attributes at any one point in time. It's context dependent. But I do think that how women translate their personal style into achieving what I've just said can be very different from the men. And as I said to you, I've always felt that I didn't want to be the shouting, screaming person in the room. I've always felt that I didn't really want to be the person that thought that getting angry and beating the table was going to be my personal style. And I always felt that what I really wanted to do was to be somebody that people could look up to, certainly the next generation, and say, oh, look, you know, if she can be successful, you know, dressing in a certain way, acting in a certain way, treating others in a certain way, I thought that might encourage and engage and perhaps inspire the next generation of women to say, look, you know, I can translate my femaleness or my womanness or my whatever and achieve great outcomes. So that's really been my philosophy.
That's phenomenal. It's so insightful. And I love what you just said about, it's not complete assimilation of seeing how somebody leads, and you have to actually do something that's not authentic to yourself. It's more acculturation, like you said, and make it your own and lead the way that you feel most comfortable. But really paying attention to those critical things that you said around leaders, you know, having clarity and creating the energy and the focus and the measuring and the accountability and bringing people along. But I think the important thing you said too is, you know, not measuring just to measure, but also measuring so that you can celebrate, right? And really embrace those accomplishments, because we all have that need to, you know, have that significance of or the validation that we've achieved something great. And I think those were all really, really great points.
I mean, if you sum it all up, I mean, to sustain leadership. I mean, I'm in my mid to late 50s now. I've been doing this. I joined the Navy when I was 19, you know, and so I think to sustain over time, a couple of things. First of all, you have to be authentic to who you are. It's really difficult to get out of bed every day and to put a mask on and go into the workplace with something that you want, but that you really fundamentally in your heart don't believe in, or it's just not you. And if you're asked to do that at any point in time, I always say to the women I mentor, it's time to get another job. It's time to think differently. So I think that's really, really important. And I think the other important point is that over time, once you get to my point of my career, I'm really now looking back, and I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
back on to learn, what worked well, what didn't, the learnings I might be able to share. And, I felt that overall what I tried to do was to increase the overall level of happiness in an organization. And that
Mm.
might sound a little bit, soft, but at the end of the day, if people are coming to work, there was a great book written on this actually, which I really liked, that described this notion of, as long as you have purpose in the workplace, you really have a sense of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you have a degree of mastery, that means that you yourself and the gift you can give to others is that you're allowing them to develop new skills and embrace new experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then as long as you're delegating and you're creating autonomy in the workplace. That's why I love that framework, because
Right.
it sort of rung so true to me, this notion of, I trust you, I trust you. I'm communicating in terms of what I feel the organization needs to achieve, but I trust you to go out there and to do your work, to deliver and be proud of what you can do. As long as you do that across the workplace, I
Mm-hmm.
think that, success will naturally follow. And that's really, I think, to me, what encompasses great leadership. And I think that's something that I've observed in my career. And as you say, I've tried to translate it into my own life
Mm-hmm.
and practice. And now what I'm trying to do, of course, is to then transmit that back through to the next generation.
Mm. And I think that's so important, the transfer of knowledge, of really being able to kind of like let the ladder down so that others can kind of come up. And that's what we're all about. We're not just about like, helping women be successful. It's accelerating that success, because, both of us know that if I knew then what I know now, I probably could have like saved a whole lot of time and gotten here a lot sooner. So I think that's really important, and I commend
So
you
true.
for that. I do have a question on, what I thought was very interesting that you talked about, and we talk about this a lot, is you identified people that you admired who were really great leaders, and you said both men and women. And one of the myths that I want to break, that I think you did organically, was that you didn't just look for the person who looked like you. Because one, in the military, like you were saying, you were probably the only, and even in pharmaceuticals and the spaces that you went into, they were very male dominated. So how did you identify those mentors and sponsors, and how did you then learn from them and create that, relationship, even though you were different from them?
Yes, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, the first, in terms of identifying, it's really no more complicated than working with people that really you connect with and inspire you. So it's really more the
Mm-hmm.
person. So I can think about, I've worked with interestingly, I've worked with many, many, many organizations. I've been on 25 boards, I think it is now. And, I've worked in 2 huge multinational corporations and had my own company, and then had the military. So, I have met on a geographic basis in the different sectors, different settings, many, many leaders in C-suite, and leaders at all levels in the organization. So I would say, just finding people that you connect with and that
Mm-hmm.
inspire you. And then it's a really interesting intellectual exercise, isn't it? To say, well,
Yes.
look, I'm connected to this person. It might be somebody from a very different geography, different generation, clearly different gender.
Mm-hmm.
And then the intellectual exercise is, what is it about them that I
Mm.
feel connects me to them, inspires me? And then I'm always interested to want to understand that. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, through a large part of my career, I was addicted to reading biographies and autobiographies, because I, pretty early on in my career, came to learn that once you're in a senior leadership position, a lot of it's about understanding people, of course. And I
Mm-hmm.
always used to say you had to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a sociologist all wrapped into one, because a lot of what we do is all about the interpersonal relationships we can build and how we motivate and inspire people
Mm-hmm.
around us. So, I mean, that's what I would say. I always felt it was a really interesting intellectual exercise to say, well, they don't look and feel like me, but they're clearly doing something great What is it about them? And often it would just be snippets of wisdom. You know, it may be that I mentioned a CEO of Bristol Myers Squibb who used to talk a lot about energy and how energy used to channel through the organization. He was then succeeded by a very, very different style of leader, a lot older. And he was somebody that I learned from him, was that he was there to do a job for about 2 or 3 years. Focus, 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 and execution. Pick 2 or 3 things. He was a CEO, and really get them done. Because I often see where people derail.
Yes.
Is this, you know, they go so broad, they want to boil the ocean, and, you know, then they lose focus. I will tell you that even to this day, when I go into companies, and even personally, I keep 2 or 3 key priorities in my head for every organization I work with, or for me personally. And I'm pretty clear about focus. The other attribute that I saw in the military, particularly, but I've seen in a number of leaders and certainly mentors of mine, has been the ability to take decisions. I actually do think that in this really risky, ambiguous, unpredictable world that we're living in right now, great leadership comes from those who are willing to lean in and take decisions.
Yes.
And not always have all the information at hand. I will tell you that when I'm mentoring women, and I saw that in myself early, I think I was always quite decisive, but I did want to analyze things a lot. And I was always asking for more data and evidence. And then I certainly evolved in my leadership to work to a model where I was basing my thinking around scenarios rather than a base plan. So scenarios that could then be informed by evidence sequentially, that would allow sequential decisions. And I learned this particularly when I was the CEO of my own company. And I always said at that company, I wanted to build a company that I always wanted to work for. I wanted to build a company that I always wanted to work for. And I think a lot of leaders do that, whether you're building a team, whether you're building a company, leading a division, you know, reflecting on what is the team or the company that I always wanted to work for, and go out and build it. Right. And as part of that, I became very clear in my head that I'd never wanted to be the constraint in the momentum and energy of an organization, that it was my job to be on my phone 24/7, making micro decisions, major decisions, where I could to keep the momentum and the energy flowing in the organization. I should never be the hold up, because I was never going to be the constraint in the organization. I think that was quite an important learning for me along the way. And then lastly, I think that a seminal moment, and I often share this with women actually that I'm mentoring, was that as I was looking at other leaders and really trying to learn like a sponge from what I was seeing, I came to the realization when I was in my late 30s that I wasn't doing enough on myself. I was looking at other people, but I wasn't really looking at myself. And I had this wonderful mentor and coach at Bristol Myers Squibb as my manager for a number of years, a remarkable man. And he held the mirror up to me one day and he said, look, you know, we swim in a sea of intellect in this organization. You clearly, you know, obviously have the intellect. You know, it's coupled with an ability to think very strategically, but you have to have a real understanding of the impact that you can have on others to be optimally effective, Annalisa. And what that was about was how I went to meetings, how I engaged with people. I felt I was being gracious and altruistic because I wanted to share my insights, but sometimes those are a little bit threatening, or perhaps they inadvertently undermined others in the room. That was a very big gift to me, that gift of feedback, because I started to think about when I said something, what impact did it have on others? And that's a really great skill set to develop, because not only does it help you build teams and engage and become very effective, helps you really in negotiations and in diplomacy and all the other things you need when you are working in the corporate world. So I think that was the other area that over the years my mentors and sponsors helped me on. And in terms of where did I find mentors and sponsors, you know, largely, of course, mentors through the people I worked with and had the privilege to work with over the years. Sponsors, you know, I don't know that you ever really know where your sponsors pop up from and where they appear from. And often you don't even know that you have them because they're advocating for you in
Mm-hmm.
meetings and talent management type meetings. But I did actually have, and still have, a few sponsors. I will tell you that they're all men. They're all men.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's
so
interesting.
that's not uncommon for my generation. When
Mm-hmm.
I looked up in the organizations that I work for, I didn't see many women.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, it's different for me. I think it's different for the next generation, hopefully. But yeah, I had all male sponsors, and they're still great friends and great advisors to me even to this day.
That's fantastic. And I think that's important. What you said is, I think the important thing that you really kind of dove into is that what is it about that individual that you admire? And like you said, it's snippets. So there are lots of different individuals, and there's certain characteristics and certain things that you are learning from them and then making it your own. And I think that's really important of staying authentic, but gleaning kind of like, this is what really kind of like motivates me, or this person motivates me because of this, and I want to learn to do that. I think that was really, really important. The other thing that you mentioned was the learning to be more decisive. And I think that's so important. I mean, being on the inside, or being the fly on the wall in many of these, promotion processes, performance review things that I used to manage in my roles in corporate, long ago. Women would get dinged a lot on the decisiveness, because we are so, in some cases, consensus driven, or the whole analysis paralysis. And you kind of alluded to that you were wanting like data and more information. And I thought it was important how you said then you kind of learned that you just didn't want to be the holdup. But the other piece that I think a lot of women struggle with, and I'd love your perspective on it, is when you decide, you divide. And there's always going to be people, the naysayers, or the people who are upset, who don't agree with you, and then the others who kind of like understand why you made the decision. How did you deal with that? Because you said you started making a lot of just quicker micro decisions or decisions, but how did you handle the the division that sometimes is created when you make a decision that is somewhat risky, or just can be political? How do you manage that? What's your perspective?
Well, of course, the first thing that one has to get used to is, certainly as you rise up through beyond being a manager, individual contributor to manager, but certainly up through an organization, is not a popularity contest. So over time, if you're running a division, or you're running a company, it's nice to be likable.
Yes.
Well, it's not critical. It's nice to be likable. And as I mentioned earlier, it's good to have a reputation for being fair and for being gracious. And I think it's important as well to have a reputation to be somewhat kind. I think that's very important. Having said that, it's extremely important that the people, and this is where this notion of following people into battle, you've got to be able to trust that your senior leader is going to make strong decisions, hopefully the right decisions, yeah. And not everyone's going to agree with that. Actually, one of my mentors said to me very early on in my career, he said, look, Annalisa, you can be, he said to me, you could be Mother Teresa, you can just be the most wonderful, gracious person in the world, and 75% of the people will love you and 25% won't. It's beyond your control. It's often related to context, and it's related to their own lived experiences and their own context. So get used to it. That's what he said to me. And that was a really good piece of feedback, because I had come from a position where I always just want to make everyone happy, and I always want to make sure that everyone can flourish and grow and shine in an organization. But I learned very early on that just really is not possible. And a lot of that was not in my control. So I think that making sure that you have values that you stick to, but be very clear that an organization is looking to a leader to take them into that battle, take them in alive and bring them out alive, and then to successfully celebrate the contribution of the team and the achievements of the team. And you can't do that if you just want to win the popularity contest. So, you know, that was something I had to get used to. And I always used to say that the best bit of feedback that I could get, and I was always very keen to ask people, you know, can I do anything differently, or am I contributing well to the organization, or how do I make you feel? And the best feedback I used to get was, you're tough but fair. I think that's really good feedback. And we appreciate your decisiveness, Annalisa, and we appreciate that you're always there for us to help us make decisions and to support us moving forward. That's the sort of feedback you want to be getting. And I do think, I hate to generalize, because I hate this gender generalization. I don't want to fall into that. But I do think women are more consensual. They want to bring people together. That's the style that women lead through. So like everything, styles have their pros and cons, and you just have to be attentive to the con associated. I would say that every decision, every has a pro and con, and you just have to decide what con you want to live with. And I do think that does call for us to reflect on our leadership styles constantly, to make sure that we understand perhaps the things that we're not quite so good at, or those areas that perhaps do drain a little bit of energy from our leadership, and then to work on those. And for me, it generally was that I'm pretty decisive, but I always had this emotional reaction that I needed to manage and rechannel when I knew that around a table there were a group of people that didn't like my decision, or I knew that by making a decision I was going to upset somebody. And so I would always try and be attuned to that and go out of my way to at least explain why I'd made the decision, appreciating the input, and then really engaging the individuals to move forward. And I didn't always get it right by any stretch of the imagination, because no one's perfect. But I think just having that sort of EQ to know the impact that your decisions are making on others, I think is step one. And then at least you can continue to make sure that people want to follow you. Now, look, at the end of the day, some people may fundamentally disagree with your position and choose to leave the organization, or choose to move into a different part of an organization. And it's important to get comfortable with that as well, because people make decisions for many different reasons, and you can't possibly understand, you know, how the people in your team or organization are living their lives and what's important to them. You try to, but you don't always get it right.
That's so insightful. And the important thing that you talked about too was feedback and the power of feedback. But the research has shown time and time again that, you know, especially when you read some of the gender research, where women aren't getting the candid, critical feedback that they need. And what I heard from you is you were very proactive in asking for the feedback. And seeking out the truth tellers. I think that's the important thing, right? Of, you know, we all kind of shy away from the feedback and don't want to hear the negative feedback. So one, how did you proactively get the critical feedback you needed? And then how did you manage to depersonalize that and not let it kind of destroy you, and use it to propel you forward?
Yeah. So the first thing to say is feedback is one of the most important gifts that anyone can offer in the workplace. I mean, that's a fundamental statement. It's something I completely believe in. And in my work every day, I really focus on ensuring that there are no secrets. The thing that I really, really hate to see, and it makes me very sad, is on many occasions where people are surprised when a manager or a senior leader may come into their office or sit them down and say, look, it's not working out, you know, we need to leave the organization, we need to move you into a different role. For me, when an employee finds that to be a surprise because they haven't received anything, I think that's a very sad and unfortunate situation. So, you know, feedback is so important because we want transparency and honesty in the workplace. Now, look, for the listeners that think that that's a very idealistic position to take, some feedback it's important to titrate feedback, and it's important to have the right context and the timing and the situation. So it's not that we should just be launching feedback on everyone 24/7. I will tell you that I did learn about this because I was very fortunate at Bristol Myers Squibb very early on. I'd moved to the US. I'd been in the UK, and then I'd been in Asia Pacific, Latin America. And I came to the US, and I hadn't really come from a culture of feedback, and this was all a bit new to me in my 30s. And I went through a leadership development program pretty early on, and it was led by one of the senior HR guys who also subsequently went on to do the DEI work, and he was just brilliant. And he said to me, Annalisa, go and seek feedback all the time. And he taught me about the Johari window that I'm sure many of you are aware of, where somebody can hold a mirror up to you and really give you a sense of how you look to others, and share that information with you that you don't have yourself. The window has the 4 quadrants, but that's the most powerful one. Is what is it that I know about you that you don't know about yourself that might be useful to you? For me, that is the biggest gift that one can give, because you want to know all the time what the impact is that you're having on others. So I used to go and seek it out all the time. I have to tell you, it's painful sometimes, but you just have to practice it, to be honest, and you just get comfortable, because over time you come to realize it's really useful. I am not shy myself in offering feedback. I've come to develop a style in terms of how you provide feedback. I think that's very important. And it's interesting. It depends on the individual. There are some people that are just like, give it to me straight, and they are so resilient, and you can just wing it into them. I remember a senior leader that used to work for me. It was a woman, actually. She was quite a character, a remarkable woman who'd really changed the face of cancer care on a global basis through her work. And yet she was a real character. And I always used to think, I've got to give her feedback. And I used to be a bit gentle. And then I came to realize I could just wing it to the middle of her eyes, right to the middle of her forehead. And she would absorb it and take it, and on she go. Whereas, there are others who find it particularly difficult. And that's the beauty of the work that we do in the workplace as leaders, is we have such a variety and diversity of people. So we have to be thoughtful about it. But I think you're right to bring this notion up, because I do see that two things. Women don't generally seek out feedback, and the men don't want to give the women feedback. There is this the do loop, which is the men struggle with how to give feedback to women, and then the women aren't asking for it. And then you get into this really somewhat destructive situation where, too many surprises. I don't really like to have surprises in my organizations. I want everybody to know where they sit, where they're great and doing well, where their development is, and how they're being seen. And the second thing I really hate to see is when there's obviously a square peg in a round hole. We don't always get it right when we put people into roles. That's fine. Managers and senior leaders make a lot of errors. You've got to be honest when that's the case. I spend a lot of time telling CEOs, why don't you just go and have a chat with that senior leader and say, this is not working. And let's unpack that and work through whether we can, resolve it, or whether it might be better for me as a senior leader to help that person into a role where they can flourish. That is absolutely the role of leaders, to have the fit right. I see a lot of that misfit. You're just not quite fit for the role. And yet people struggling to understand how to resolve that. So that's a very key area, I think, that leaders need to pay attention in their organizations.
That's so insightful. And I love the way that you said it, that it almost, feedback is a gift. And it's almost now kind of this FOMO of like, I want the feedback now. And it's just like, so I think that's fantastic.
That was so funny. I did get to a point in my career where I was so overloaded with feedback. I went to bed every night thinking I had some sort of it was just, my head was swimming. I remember going to my boss and saying, please, no more 360s, no more rating scales, no more Myers-Briggs. Just let me just try and live with what I've learned for a year or two. So, it's like everything in life, it needs to be a balance. But I think, women and men, I think if you're in senior leadership positions or you're going through an organization, you don't think you're getting enough feedback, or you don't really have a sense of how other people see you or how your boss sees you beyond the annual rating reviews. I think that that's on, your onus is on you to go out and find that.
That's fantastic. Well, this has been phenomenal, but I do want to shift gears a little bit and ask you, you know, the work that you're doing now, and in terms of kind of trying to democratize access and helping entrepreneurs. Share a little bit about that.
Mhm. Mm. So, of course, we're living in this amazing age of life science innovation, the digital age, and the combination of the two, which is absolutely fascinating. And that's really from, you know, if I think about the life science sector, and we include pharma and biotech in that, it's all the way from, you know, the discoveries that are going on in our academic labs, basic research, you know, the underpinnings in the biology of disease, genomics, all the way through to how we bring those insights into the development of new therapeutics, diagnostics, you know, devices, etc. And then right out into how we think about the delivery of care on a global basis and access, the equality of access to that care. So that's a huge, broad agenda. And then the cross-cutting theme on that is digital, because you can now lay digital across the entire spectrum, of what I just described. So I personally get the privilege now of picking all the different areas in that ecosystem that I might want to work on. And generally, I have done that traditionally through serving on boards, both in the public and private sector. And certainly for me, boards that are at that stage of translating early academic phase research, the translation of that into companies and then into actual products that potentially can impact and make a difference in people's lives. So that's the area that I've picked. And I essentially go out and find great teams and people that potentially want me to help them with that. And I try and make it very diverse. So diverse geographically, diverse in the sector, public, private, academic, and then importantly, diverse in you know, in the different aspects. So I have a lot of work, say, in mental health. Now, in mental health, I might be working on a therapeutic, a digital solution, work in the non-profit sector. So I try and pick areas. Mental health, important to me. Women's health, very important. Interestingly underserved areas like the development of novel antimicrobials. I've done a lot of work on COVID, of course, but you know, AMR, antimicrobial resistance, is a big area.
Right.
So I've tried to pick areas, and I still have my footholds a little bit in the areas that I love, of course, which is in cancer, rare diseases. So that's how I pick the areas, and the portfolio obviously is extensive, but it's all synergistic, because I think that what I'm trying to do is take learnings from one area and share them across different areas. And to be honest, a lot of the themes are very consistent about, you know, the importance of how do you get access to capital? How do you build teams? How do you get access to talent? Frankly, human capital and financial capital, a cross-cutting theme. And the second cross-cutting theme now is how do you, from a legal, regulatory, compliant, but also from an ethical and moral point of view, bring the digital, this whole digital world into what we do. And that's a really interesting space now. So that's what I'm up to today.
Wow, that's
fantastic.
Keeps me very busy. and you know, but I think the other important thing is how you have the conviction to kind of the curiosity to remain relevant, right? And you're seeing the trends of the digital disruption, and it's like you are anticipating what could be happening, and you're kind of on the forefront of it, opposed to, and you're disrupting yourself before you get disrupted. So I think that's the other important lesson that I see and I hear in what you're sharing is, you know, constantly staying on top of what's happening in the industry and how could it impact all of the different facets that you're working on, whether it's biomedical or therapeutical or you know, whatever it is. How could that get disrupted? And like you were kind of, you're identifying the wave so you all can ride it, opposed to getting crushed by it, right? So I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, well, I would say that over my entire career, I've always been very inquisitive, and I've always read way beyond my technical area of expertise. So again, when I coach or mentor women executives, I'm always encouraging them to say you've got to be broad. You know, you have to be interested in geopolitics. God, goodness, we're seeing that now, unfortunately. But you know, you have to be interested in that. You have to be interested, you know, in all of the literature that's emerging on, you know, next generation and leadership and all of that. That's a very intellectual exercise. You have to be interested in different sectors. You know, I have a chair actually of something called the Conduit Connect, and the Conduit Connect is a community in the UK, broadening, of social entrepreneurs that come from all different diverse parts of the world and sectors and society actually. But what we share in common is that we want to make a difference along the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have different ways of thinking about how to do that. So I chair a platform which seeks out social entrepreneurs that are working in private enterprises that have impact, that are looking to have an impact as it relates to SDG, and then connecting those with investors who are the so-called impact investors, but really, you know, long-term investors that want to really, again, make a difference in the world. So that's a fantastic opportunity for me, hopefully, to have, you know, to make a difference. And I was going to say, that's way beyond healthcare. So the most popular areas that we work in are really the novel models of education on a global basis and how that's being dislocated by innovation. And then, of course, in the ag, clean energy space area. I love that because, of course, I'm learning lots of new ideas that come across our desk about recycling, reuse in many different sectors. I was looking at a company this week. I was engaging a company that's using AI for automated vehicles to reduce energy consumption and increase efficiency at ports. It's random. I'm working on clean air to reduce allergens and increase the health and wellness of people in their offices on a global basis through genomic sequencing, and I'm mentoring a CEO on that. So what I'm trying to say is that always be inquisitive, read broadly, so that you can bring those ideas and be innovative in your workplace. And you know, ideas come from all sorts of interesting areas of society, which is why also working in the non-profit area for me has been very important across my entire career. And I always encourage everybody to have an active non-profit charitable portfolio, because you learn a lot when you work in that sector, and that can be relevant and translated into the private sector.
That's phenomenal. And I think what I gleaned from that is the power of curiosity and the cross-pollination of reading all of these different things, and how sometimes, you know, you can connect the dots and integrate some things and be innovative in it. I think that's phenomenal. This has been an amazing conversation, and it has me kind of like my gears kind of like going, you know, like overdrive. But I want to, as we close, do my favorite part of just lightning round, because you do read so much and you have all these things. So I'm interested in you know, how you'll answer some of these questions. So 5 quick questions, quick answers, but what book has greatly influenced you?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. It's called Drive, and I think it's a must read for everyone. But my other little book, and I know this is a lightning round, but this is the one that really I love and I go back to all the time. There's a book that was written, it was called Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? And it was by the guy that built GE, and it's a little weekend read. And the basic tenet of that book was about focus, execution, and leadership. This was written a long time ago. And you read a lot of business books, but at the end of the day, there's a few business books that really sum it all up. And and I often go back and read it, because you can read it in about 10 hours. It's very good to keep you focused on what's important when you're a senior leader in an organization.
That's fantastic. What is your favorite inspiring quote or saying?
Live the life you love and love the life you lead. You know, we haven't talked a lot about this importance of having a very rich, enjoyable, purposeful life outside of the workplace. People used to ask me a lot about work-life balance. I said, there's not work-life balance. It's
Mm-hmm.
about how you balance your lifestyle. And given where we are now with the raging epidemic of mental health issues on a global basis,
Mm-hmm.
so important to be able to look after yourself and define the life that you really want to lead, and to enjoy it and love it. So I think that that's what I've always, well, I haven't always done that actually. I haven't been very disciplined about that, but I always try and say to people that I work with that please define the life you want to lead and enjoy it along the way.
That's so important. That's so important. What is one word or moniker you would use to describe yourself?
Well, on a good day, I'd probably say on a good day, well, one word I hope would be gracious. Gracious.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I would agree. I totally would agree in this short time that we spent with each other. What is one thing, one change, either a habit, behavior, action, you implemented that made your life better?
Oh, definitely carving out about 2 hours every morning. Now, I have the luxury of doing this, let me say, because I'm at a certain phase in my life to go to the gym. And I always love exercise. But the point is that I go to the gym. I don't go to the gym purely to exercise. I go to place myself in a space that gives me peace. It gives me the ability to think, reflect, to prepare myself for what's coming during the day. And I don't always engage in weights and cardiovascular. I may go and just sit in the steam and sauna, but I go to a place which for me is a place of mindfulness. And I didn't do that for many years. And I started to put that in place a few years ago. And it's really, I have to tell you, it's created so much more capacity in my brain and ability to, to get stuff done. So and for the listeners, that's what helps me. And I guess what I'm saying is find what works for you and be very disciplined about that habit.
Think time, it's so important, and how it can really unlock your potential when you give yourself the time, the white space to kind of think. And like you said, important to go to an environment that creates that space for you. That's phenomenal. Last question. If you're walking out onto a stage, what is the power song that would be playing in the background as you walked out onto the stage?
Oh my goodness, I love music. It's one of my secrets that I absolutely adore music. Well, I'm actually a Coldplay super fan.
Okay.
So I would say they have this song called Paradise. And I, what I'd say is that the song would be playing and the video would be playing, because the video to Paradise is one of color, it's brightness and it's energy, and we never really, obviously in life one never really truly gets to paradise, but I think you only have one chance at life, and so it's got to be fun. And I've always tried with all the teams and organizations that I've worked with to at least have fun and to feel that I was trying to go. I always hoped when I left an organization that I left it in a better place than when I started. I will tell you, I'm sure I wasn't always successful, but that was what I was always trying to do. So I play Paradise a lot when I'm in the gym in my AirPods, when I want a bit of an uplift, because it reminds me what I'm trying to achieve.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, Annalisa, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your pearls of wisdom and for transferring all of the knowledge you did in this podcast. I'm sure our listeners are going to love it. And I'm sure they're going to want to probably reach out or follow you, because you piqued a lot of curiosity in me, and I'm sure lots of our listeners. So what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Oh, on LinkedIn. I have a huge network on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn because it's this notion of connection and collaboration. And so please feel free to reach out and ask me to link up to you, and then you'll become part of my community. And then if you want a specific one-on-one, then I'll get back to you, and you can we can connect.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time, and it was amazing.
Thanks, Monica.